Good morning and good afternoon to everyone who is joining us live today. You are joining the webinar, How to Troubleshoot Citrix's Flow, even when the issue may not be Citrix itself. Today, you have myself, Stacy Leidwinger. I'm from the marketing team here at Goliath Technology. I'm joined with Yemi Ladyju, who's our senior technical consultant. And finally, I'm very excited to have George Spiers, a certified Citrix technical professional, who I'm going to more formally introduce in a minute. So before we get started and jump in, I did want to go through just a few house cleaning items. In terms of the flow for today, we're going to go through very short slides just to set expectations, talking about what are the challenges we see in the community in terms of troubleshooting Citrix and why at times it can be so difficult to really isolate that root cause. We're going to then follow up with 3 very specific customer scenarios where organizations were struggling to isolate root cause. They were struggling to solve logon performance issues, slow session performance issues, and overall slowness during a Citrix migration, and talk about how they use different methods and tools to exactly pinpoint root cause so they could deliver permanent fixes, but also how they were able to put in place things to prevent them from coming up in the future. We're then going to wrap up with Q&A. So please submit your questions either in the chat or question box. We may stop and take a few during the session as it makes sense, but we will certainly either follow up here at the very end, or we will send written responses to any that we may not have time to get to. And yes, as always, we will provide a recording within the next 24 hours of this should you want to follow up or even share with any of your colleagues. So with that, I'd love to give a warm introduction to George Spiers. He is joining us here live from the UK. He has multiple years of experience working with Citrix. He is a certified technical professional since 2018. There's only 50 in the world, and he earns this title because of his credentials, his ongoing speaking, blogging, and overall serving of the Citrix community. So we're very excited to have him here today and to really talk about some of the observations he sees, not only in his own organization, but as he engages in the overall community. George, with that, why don't you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you're seeing out there or have experienced, and why it's so challenging to isolate that root cause of Citrix's flow complaints, why I think many of us here on the phone have spent hours trying to solve that problem, have lost maybe days at times, and that frustration level can become quite high and also have some negative impact in the organization.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey, and hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. So yeah, the challenges with Citrix and troubleshooting Citrix. A lot of the Citrix issues and troubleshooting challenges are essentially you need to consider the entire picture. So for a virtualization platform like Citrix to work effectively, there are many different supporting services that need to be working. So things like your network, your storage infrastructure, your hypervisor hosts, Active Directory, DNS, SQL, all these pieces make up the puzzle. So that's one of the challenges. Other challenges would include hybrid infrastructure where you have some components on-premise and some in the cloud. And this is becoming more of a normality in the enterprise today. With hybrid comes an extra layer of complexity, and that's because you cannot always see the components that are situated in the cloud. Take Citrix Cloud as an example of this challenge. That piece is managed entirely by Citrix themselves, and it is often out of your control, and you don't have often visibility of those background components. The workforce is another challenge when supporting Citrix environments. In my experience of supporting Citrix environments, literally people do work from all sorts of locations, and they work on a wide variety of devices. You can't always control those locations that users work from, and often you cannot also control the device. And that's especially the case when BYOD is allowed in your environment. So trying to support that workforce consumes extra time and effort. And finally, really at the end of the day, your Citrix deployment success is going to come down to how well it performs consistently. If it does not perform on a consistent basis, it will be deemed a failed deployment and user adoption will be slow or potentially not at all. And you want to avoid this at all costs. So now I'll discuss the needs for a purpose-built monitoring tool. So I mentioned that considering the entire picture and all the different components that help make a Citrix environment perform. So that's really why it's worthwhile having a monitoring product, because it sees this bigger picture that I've talked about. It's often too difficult for yourself to check each of the components that make up a Citrix environment or the supporting services, or even have the knowledge to detect a problem with another component, such as in your storage environment. So how many of us are Citrix experts, but also SQL experts and AD experts and storage experts? That just doesn't really happen. Often in the enterprise, speaking from experience, Citrix admins specialize in Citrix. They don't necessarily look after the storage or the network. You need other teams to do that and look after those infrastructure components. And that's where a monitoring product can help you, because it can help pinpoint the problem much quicker in all these different components. So an effective monitoring tool must prevent the end user issues before they occur, and that can be done by using embedded intelligence and automation. So IT never wants to be seen as being reactive, right? We don't want that. Often health checks carried out each day are mundane, and to be honest, they're not going to stop you from being reactive in certain situations. So for this reason, you need a product that understands your environment when it's not working right, with the ability to automate a resolution on your behalf as well. So you'll be able to see a tool today that can actually help with that. The tool must also provide deep and broad metrics across the entire IT infrastructure. So you need to be able to get visibility of the end user behavior and experience. So what type of experience are my users receiving from their virtual apps and desktops? Is their logon time slow, or are they quick or acceptable? What's the session response time like? Is it slow, or is it on par with expectations? When you're running critical applications, you really cannot afford to take zero notice of the user experience being provided. Even in healthcare, across your HR modules, it is possible to record and analyze the end user experience. So it really must be taken seriously. Historical reports and analytics, another key factor of an effective monitoring tool. So whilst we live in the now and troubleshoot day by day, there is also a requirement to look back on time and evaluate how your environment performed 3 weeks ago compared to today, for example. Windows patching and product updates or upgrades happen every month to every quarter. Often we think that an update makes things faster, but that is actually a misconception. And in fact, an update can more so unsettle an environment and make it perform worse. So with a tool that provides this historical reporting and analytics, you're going to be in a better position to assess and make decisions on your infrastructure as it moves through the life cycle. And with that, I want to hand it over to Stacey, who I think knows a tool that does much of what I just talked about.
No, George, I don't think I could have said it better myself. And in fact, one of the things that you said really resonates with me. You talked about how not everyone is an expert in each of the infrastructure components or even user behavior that can impact that experience. We often at Goliath hear from our customers where they say once they have our tool up and running, it's like they've earned 1 to 3 extra headcount in really isolating root cause of issues and finding permanent resolutions. And so it's really saving them not only time, but people and resources because of that embedded intelligence and automation. So I promised that was our move back to the customer slide. So this slide here was our one marketing slide that I did want to go through. Just so everyone's familiar with Goliath, we do provide a monitoring and troubleshooting software for hybrid IT environments. We absolutely use that embedded intelligence and automation. So IT professionals like George and many on the phone here can anticipate, troubleshoot, and prevent end user experience issues, regardless of where that IT workload or users are located. And here you see just a sampling of some of the customers that we work with. We work across not only Citrix, but also VMware Horizon, if we have anyone using more of a hybrid environment, or exclusively them as well. We work with a variety of industries. We do have purpose-built tools just for healthcare, where we also provide monitoring and troubleshooting for performance around the EHR modules. We're one of the only tools on the market that does that today, and have partnerships with the likes of Cerner. And the biggest thing is our tool is really built to scale to the largest of enterprises with thousands of users and multiple locations, as well as smaller organizations like a law firm who might have smaller offices, different offices, but their staff really requires constant uptime, high performance, high reliability across their virtualized desktops and apps. And that's what we really support. So everything that George just referenced in terms of what a tool provides is absolutely what Goliath offers. And so with that, instead of me telling, we'd really like to go ahead and show how the tool works and how it provides assistance. And so I'm actually going to turn it back to George, who's going to open up our first session, which is around troubleshooting slow logon time. So George, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so in end user computing, when we work with virtual desktops or terminal servers, logon performance is one of the most important things I think about when deploying a new system. I really want the logon time to be as little as possible, and I actually get a real sense of accomplishment when I can offer end users a low logon time. Plus, those end users are going to be super happy as well. So I'm sure many of you on the call today will actually fully agree with me on this. However, that said, as we all know by now, that accomplishment isn't easily achieved. It takes work. It takes quite a bit of work as well. So often a lot of the problems with slow logons come down to the deployment of newer operating systems or Citrix software that may not be configured as per best practice or may not be optimized. So, for example, I feel for the organizations that deploy new versions of Windows. I've been there and I continue to be there. When a new operating system comes out, it's got new applications installed on those, new services, new scheduled tasks, and IT doesn't really know what can be turned off or what can be left on. So that's really where the community helps and comes to our benefit as well, because from the community you get years of experience from all administrators from all over the world. We learn what worked for them, or we share what worked for us. And moving the conversation ahead, some of the most common logon time impactors are large and hard to manage user profiles. Profiles will bloat if you let them, period. And that causes a raft of issues. A lot of issues I've seen have been caused by large profiles or profile solutions that haven't been configured as per best practice. Logon scripts. These logon scripts are often configured in the environment. They're forgot about and they're never removed from the environment. Group policy settings, again, they can be configured, forgot about, and never actually removed or cleaned up. Lack of compute can cause slow logon times. Hypervisors that simply cannot cope with the user load will be a problem. Lack of VDA resource, so your desktops just cannot run. They don't have the resource to run effectively, and that can also result or be the result of a constrained hypervisor. Even incorrect Active Directory configuration, DNS, or group policy can impact the logon times. And finally, slow network connections, spotty networks between the end users in the data center that host your resources. That can also be a common factor of slow logon times. And with that, I want to hand it over to Yemi to walk through some of the troubleshooting scenarios and demos.
Thank you very much, George. And I think some of those things that you've pointed out in that previous slide, we're going to touch on in a number of these customer scenarios, touch on how we were able to help them find these issues and sort of justify fix actions moving forward. So with that, leading into this first troubleshooting scenario, this is one specifically to logon times. And here we have a large healthcare system, and specifically this is a very unique type of healthcare system because they are a home healthcare provider. So they have 30 office locations around the United States, and predominantly when these healthcare staff actually interface with patients, they are doing this from the patient's homes. So it's imperative that they have sort of their resources available to them from anywhere in the United States. So when we talk about their infrastructure, they have a standard sort of infrastructure where they have a standard Citrix virtual apps and desktop environment. Their EHR system was Arrow Systems. And they had VMware hypervisor infrastructure. They did have some legacy Zen server infrastructure as well. And the major sort of pain point or challenge that they were having is poor logon performance, particularly when it comes to when they're accessing their EHR system from these patients' locations. And the thing that made it even worse is that the IT department did not have sort of any visibility or any ability to point to what's actually causing the slowness. So what this now did was it caused a lot of these healthcare providers to have to delay, caused a lot of delays in their ability to perform sort of patient care, because you have a number of appointments in a particular day, and when you're having slow logon issues where it takes forever to log in and also kicks you off the system and you have to start the login process over and over again, these healthcare staff would have to then delay appointments and maybe even postpone or cancel appointments, which really isn't very effective at all. So before I jump into the demonstration portion and show you how we were able to help when it comes to troubleshooting these issues, I wanted to point out that we were able to identify 3 issues across the entire environment that were adding times to the logon process. Number 1 was high CPU utilization for a particular set of users. Another one was group policies, similar to what George spoke about in a couple slides previous, as well as some high memory utilization as well. And these are sort of the things that they were able to identify with our technology. So let's show you how they did that. So we're going to jump right into the technology here. And what we're looking at on the screen here is our Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Session Display. And as the name implies, this is where all of the sessions show up in your environment, all of the sessions across in this particular case, all of those EHR sessions, as well as any desktop sessions that are being published to those healthcare staff. Now, typically, when customers get to the screen, and particularly this customer after they deployed our technology, they got here when they've gotten an alert telling the IT department that a particular healthcare provider is having an issue inside of the session, whether it's a poor logon time, like in this case, or maybe sustained latency inside of a session, or even a poor performing application. And once they get to the screen, they now use this to troubleshoot. So really quickly, they have the ability to sort of move these tabs around to make it sort of configurable and personalize this screen so that every time you get here, you can effectively troubleshoot. Obviously, you have the ability to quick filter here for any user session, as well as any sort of receiver version or delivery group, session state, so on and so forth. You also, I just want to point out here, that we don't average or roll up any information that you see here on the screen. So, for instance, we had a lot of, in this particular customer scenario, there were a lot of healthcare providers that had back-to-back appointments, and whenever they would experience a logon problem, they wouldn't report it right away because they were late for their next appointment. So it would take maybe a day or maybe 2 days before they actually reported these sort of issues. Here, the IT department had the ability to retroactively go back and see exactly what was happening on each one of those sessions that they were having issues with. So without sort of rambling on here, let's say, for instance, the user's calling in complaining, sort of like in this particular example, complaining about a poor logon. You can isolate the session that you want to click on. You can then click on the session. And here, now what the IT department is presented with is about a pop-up of about 8 tabs showing all the information they need to troubleshoot any particular issue taking place in this particular user session, starting off with this summary tab. So the process that they went through when trying to troubleshoot these logons were taking a look at this first section here, taking a look at all of the components that actually contributed to this session for this particular user, you know, their endpoint machine, the NetScaler that they connected in from, their delivery controller, so on and so forth, down to the VM and hypervisor host that was supporting that session. And what they started to notice is that for all of those sessions that had, you know, sort of issues, or for a majority of those sessions that had issues, they were noticing that they were on their legacy Zen server host, which sort of was a cause of sort of intrigue. So what they then did was they flipped over to the hypervisor host section, and this section pulls in all the information for the time frame of the user session from the hypervisor host. And what they were able to identify was high resource utilization from the hypervisor host for almost all of those sessions that were having poor performance. They were also able to see at the bottom of the screen that most of the other VMs being supported by these hypervisor hosts that were in their legacy Zen server environment were also having issues. So this was information that they took directly to management to justify the removal of these hosts from production to sort of speed up the logon times, because they identified these hosts as being bottlenecks in the entire logon process. Another thing that they found specifically in a lot of these logons were poor group or long times within the GPO stage, the group policy objects. So what they did was they flipped over to the logon duration tab here, and this tab now gives them details into each stage of this particular logon process for this user, starting off with this top section here, showing you exactly what's going on during the brokering stages of the logon process. It was here that they were able to identify, wait, there was a lot of times in the drive mapping stages here at the delivery controller, and drilling further down in this bottom section, they were able to sort of take a closer look at what's actually causing those problems. So just to set the context here, so this bottom stage will automatically adjust, or it will change depending on what you actually have configured in your environment. So, you know, as you sort of add group policies or things like authentication process, all these sections will then expand so you can see, you know, what actually is going into this particular user's logon. So in this case, they expanded the group policy stage, and what they found was that there was a drive map policy that was actually mapping to a drive that has been decommissioned. So there was a 2-minute timeout. They were able to see that exactly from this screen. They were able to see the group policy name, how long it was taking, and how it was affecting those users' sessions. It was really quick and easy fix, remove the policy, and they were able to cut the logon times by 2 minutes. Finally, the last thing that they were able to find was that within some of those machines that were supporting sessions, that there was a lot of memory utilization issues on those machines, and that was actually contributing times to the logon process as well. And in that same user session, in that same sort of, without clicking into a different portion of the technology or clicking into a different sort of section, you have the ability to see that here on this same user session. So that's how they were able to sort of go through each user session, find exactly what was causing those issues, point to them so that they can sort of justify those fix actions moving forward. So with that, I have a question for you, George. In your experience, do you see sort of issues like this where there are multiple different different issues that are contributing to logon times in any particular environment?
Yeah, I can certainly relate, Yemi. So logon times impacted by issues with group policy or high CPU, like you've talked about, can be experienced often with a new deployment of a Citrix environment, but certainly also through upgrades or updates and so on. That aside, I've personally seen issues with slow logons being a result of deploying new operating systems and new hardware as well. So often when deploying a new operating system, you might have difficulties optimizing it in the right manner. So I mentioned before, when operating systems are released, they come with new bells and whistles, and IT don't really know how to optimize them. So what do I turn off? What do I turn on? You don't want to break any functionality, but at the same time, you don't want to something to be taking up resource, but it's not providing any benefit to your end users. So many IT pros had issues getting Windows 10 to work effectively in VDI when it was released, and I'll actually be the first to admit that I found it difficult as well. Problems with universal Windows apps, start menu, and so on was making the end user experience poor. So when you're deploying new operating systems, you'll probably also hopefully be deploying those VMs to new hardware that your organization has purchased. And that hardware may not be correctly configured, or it just may be underperforming, and that can make a VM run slow, and it can also impact logons. So yeah, Yemi, in this scenario, I've seen where logon time can be impacted from multiple different areas of the infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, and that sort of almost emphasizes the importance of having a tool that has the ability to see into all of those different portions, all of those different pieces that impact Citrix, so that you can come up with definitive answers. So moving on to the scenario 2. This scenario specifically is about troubleshooting, or how we were able to help this customer, Penn National, troubleshoot in-session performance issues for their remote workers or their remote workspace initiative. So here's another sort of standard environment where you have they're fully VDI environment on Citrix, so their virtual desktops environment. They did a full iGel conversion, so they converted a number of laptops and machines over to iGel thin clients. And that was really driven by their mobile workspace initiative, where they wanted their insurance adjusters to be able to work from anywhere without having to come into the office. They were on VMware hypervisor infrastructure. And another thing that added complexity to this particular environment is that they were using Cisco IP communicator soft phones inside of the VDI sessions. Because these are insurance adjusters, they wanted to be able to handle claims and record audio in as crisp a fashion as possible. So this definitely added some complexity to this deployment as well. So they have this mobile workspace initiative. They stood up a brand new Citrix environment, and everything was supposed to work fine until it didn't, right? Users complaining that the new environment is slow, they can't record, the sound inside of their sessions were terrible, and this was actually slowing down the adoption and slowing down the project itself, because as users start to talk internally about how this platform is not very good, most people didn't want to move to the platform. So that's how we sort of got brought into the picture. And really, they wanted to be able to tell exactly what was causing these issues so that they could actually fix them and make sure that every user had access to the best possible Citrix experience. So let's go through how they were able to do that with our technology. And similar to the first portion of the technology, here they went over to the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops display. This customer was actually full VDI, so they were able to see sort of all of the sessions taking place in the environment. And similar to the other use case, they have the ability to pull back sessions from historic sessions. They have the ability to get alerted to the fact that any user is having a particular issue inside of their session, so on and so forth. So let's take the example that they gave us personally. They had a user calling in saying that, my session was great all day until about 3 p.m. I started experiencing issues inside of my session. So the IT department, first of all, when she called in complaining about these issues, they were able to say, okay, yeah, we did get an alert to the fact that you were having an issue, and we are taking a look at it now. So that sort of, number one, added a little bit of credibility to the IT department, and put the user at ease. Okay, I do know, because they know that the IT department is equipped to be able to handle some of these issues that they needed to be solved. So in this case, they were able to isolate this user session. They clicked on the session, and similar to the earlier example, they were able to get a pop-up here of 8 tabs showing them all of the information they need to troubleshoot issues in this user session, starting off with, again, this summary tab. Now, in this case, they didn't look at the top section very much or the logon duration because they knew that this particular issue was focused on in-session performance. So they flipped over to the key performance metrics section, and here they were able to identify and confirm, okay, by looking at the round trip time, that this user was having a good session up until about 3 p.m. They were able to confirm that because right about 3 p.m., the ICA round trip time spiked, and they were able to see, okay, there's some issues here. Taking it a little bit further, they were able to look at network latency. This metric is very sort of unique to the Goliath platform. This is real-time network latency. It's not the typical ICMP or ping-based network latency that can be deprioritized or something like that. But this is network latency that we're extracting directly from the ICA protocol, showing you exactly how much the network or network performance is impacting this particular user session. And what they were able to see is that when ICA round trip time went high, network latency also went high. What this showed them is that it wasn't a resource issue, it wasn't an under-provisioned VM or hypervisor issue that was causing the problem. It was actually something with the network. That's a good starting point, because now I can rule out a vast majority of the environment and focus on the network. Now, they were able to take it a little bit further with this metric here at the bottom, connection speed. This is specifically user connection speed. So this is the amount of bandwidth that was available for Citrix for that user session. So they were able to see that during those times where she had a good session, her connection speed was about 40 megabits per second, which is amazing for her VDI environment. However, at 3 p.m., they saw a drastic drop in connection speed. So they asked her, hey, what happens at your home at 3 p.m.? Because I can see here that from about 8 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., everything seemed fine, but something happens at 3 p.m. And she said, oh, yeah, my kids come back from school, and my husband also gets back from work, and he's on this computer. The kids are playing Xbox. So basically, they're sort of saturating or utilizing a lot of that Wi-Fi that she has at home, which sort of saturated the Wi-Fi access point and then caused her connection speed to drop, which then caused her to have problems inside of her session. This is sort of objective evidence to show to her, hey, look, this isn't a Citrix problem. This isn't something with our network. It's something that's happening at your endpoint. And as she kicked other people off of the network, they were able to see in real time that her connection speed went back up, and her Citrix session was more stable. So having this information for all of those users, number one, it gave them the ability to troubleshoot, and because they were able to have these productive conversations with end users, they were able to sort of flip the entire perception of this new environment and prove that the environment's working fine and the IT department is competent enough to support these sort of scenarios. So that's one that's exactly how Penn National was able to sort of leverage the technology and leverage some of the deep metrics that we get to be able to solve these sort of issues. So with that, I know we had another scenario, but I wanted to hand it over to George to talk a little bit about sort of the Citrix experience when it comes to upgrades.
Yeah, thanks, Yemi. Yeah, I just want to talk a little about this diagram. This is the Citrix support lifecycle for virtual apps and desktops. So if Citrix release a new version of virtual apps and desktops today, and say, for example, your organization goes on to deploy it shortly thereafter, just keep this in mind that end of maintenance is 6 months after the initial release date of a virtual apps and desktops version. So after 6 months, Citrix won't provide any patches. You may be asked to upgrade if you have an issue which isn't easily resolvable by Citrix support. And then end of life is 18 months after the initial release date. So that is when the product becomes out of support. So just keep this in mind. It's important to know, because often organizations really just leave it too long before upgrading, and before you know it, you find yourself running an unsupported deployment of virtual apps and desktops. Citrix and many other vendors are innovating faster than ever, right? Citrix Cloud releases are like every 2 weeks. On-premise releases come roughly every quarter. So this inevitably pulls customers into a faster update and upgrade cycle than what was maybe experienced before the whole cloud concept gained traction. So as I mentioned previously, updates and upgrades don't often make your environment run smoother or quicker. Yes, there's innovation, there's great new features, but the fundamentals of logon times, availability, responsiveness, and so on are definitely at risk when you introduce new code into your environment. And again, this is where a monitoring tool can help. Historical analytics forms a baseline of your environment over time. So what happens, you want to compare the difference after an upgrade, just monitor your new environment and compare the differences. And that aside, monitoring also effectively helps you troubleshoot issues faster, especially with embedded intelligence and automation. So the quicker an end user issue is resolved, the more successful your deployment will be, the more user adoption will be seen. And even better, an end user may not even realize that there was a problem, as it would be resolved before the user noticed. Over to you, Yemi.
Thanks, George. And I think, talking about embedded intelligence, a nice segue into the next troubleshooting scenario that we have here. Here we have a law firm that they were in the process of upgrading from their legacy 6.5 Citrix environment to 7.9. And some of the things, obviously, here's another sort of complex environment with hybrid infrastructure where they had their Citrix role servers, or sort of the infrastructure servers in AWS, and then they had their VDI machines on premise on VMware. And the challenge that they were having specifically was, while standing up this new environment, as you mentioned, George, they were having issues with logon times in that new environment. And again, this is another example of this poor performing new environment actually sort of deterring users from adopting it, because everyone talks about how the new environment is not very good, it's not very stable, it takes a long time to log in, and people don't want to actually sort of adopt to that new environment. So in this case, they reached out to us, we deployed our technology, and leveraging the embedded intelligence and automation, they were able to take a look at here, which is our automatic discovery and dependency map for Citrix. And this will automatically map out the entire Citrix delivery infrastructure, show you exactly how components are connected to each other, and leverage sort of 300 monitoring rules that we apply to the environment right out of the box. And these monitoring rules are monitoring for conditions, failure points, events, based on the type of components that you have in your environment. So in this case, this customer was able to, on deployment, see their brand new Citrix 7.9 environment, see exactly how the components were laid out, exactly what was actually contributing to user experience in their environment. And then those monitoring rules then drove a heat map structure on the screen. So as issues start to take place on any one of these components, they were able to see the components turn orange or red depending on the severity of those alerts, so they can see exactly what's affecting user experience in their environment. From here, once they were able to get this once this automatically deployed and built out for them, they were seeing major issues on delivery controllers across the board in the new environment. Specifically, there were connection failures due to the delivery controllers being under provisioned. So the delivery controllers just couldn't handle 8 a.m. users logging in, a bunch of users logging in and needed their sessions brokered. So there was poor CPU utilization as well as memory utilization. And, at that point, they were able to then allocate more resources to the delivery controllers automatically, and then they were able to solve those issues and create a better adoption rate for the new environment. So this, as George, you mentioned, embedded intelligence and automation really enables you, right, to, without any effort at all, be able to see exactly any macro issues or bottlenecks in your environment so that you can actually solve them. So with that, I'm going to jump back into the presentation and talk a little bit about that final piece that we talked about, which is the historical reporting and analytics. So with our technology, we have about 65 different, over 65 reports that you can run sort of, on a scheduled basis in your environment. And I wanted to point out a couple of the sort of most popular ones that a lot of our customers leverage on a daily basis or a monthly basis in their environments. Starting off with this license usage report. This one I know is used heavily by a lot of our large customers when it comes to capacity planning. When you're upgrading to new hardware or you're adopting new applications into your environment, this report allows you to see the license usage based on times, based on delivery groups, based on locations. So this allows you to understand, okay, do I need more licenses? Or am I able to support the users in my environment or support more users in my environment, with the licenses that I have? We had a customer that, has users all across the globe, actually. So when users in, let's say, the United States were utilizing Citrix licenses, users in Japan weren't. So they were able to use this report to understand the sort of flow of the environment so that they can be able to support those users. The next couple are about logon duration. With the detailed metrics that we get with logon duration, the logon duration reports that we have are very, very detailed and very specific and give you insight into the performance of your environment per stage of the logon process for all of your users. So here's one that's very text heavy, showing you, the logon duration by stage for all of the users across the environment. But here's one that's very graphically intensive, and it shows you by stage, pulling up together each stage, so your group policies or your brokering and client validation. And this is heavily used by management to be able to understand how the environment is working, especially within healthcare. George, do you have any sort of use cases or thoughts about how these reports would be helpful in any environment?
Yeah, I mean, reports just in general are going to have one use case or another. There's going to be some scenario or for some reason that you're going to want to have a report, and whether that be for yourself or for management, for example. Obviously for IT, reports are definitely helpful. We get to see how logon times, for example, have increased or hopefully have decreased or stayed the same over a period of time. I've mentioned before that logon times are so important to a Citrix environment, and they're so important to a Citrix administrator as well. So being able to see these reports and seeing logon times historically is certainly useful. But as I mentioned, it's not good just for IT. Management are also interested in reports because they're interested to see how the environment is performing, and then for this scenario, how logons are performing in their environment as well. Reports like license usage, which you touched on, these can be used for capacity planning. So in advance, you can capacity plan your license count, and you can see how and from what area of the business your licenses are being used as well. So yeah, I mean, everybody likes reports because, again, at some stage, you're probably going to have to provide evidence that your solution is delivering as expected.
Thanks, George. And with that, I can pass it back to you to talk a little bit more about sort of the embedded intelligence, or it's just the purpose or the importance of having a purpose-built tool.
Yeah, so I think, Yemi, I was going to take it from here and just remind everyone we've got a few questions that have come in. I do appreciate everyone staying on, waiting for some of the Q&A. But as you put them into the question box, I just want to remind kind of everyone here and summarize today in terms of what you saw, right? You really saw the ability that with purpose-built software, you can hire that extra 1, 2, 3 person expertise staff per se to really isolate those root cause and find permanent fixtures for your issues, but also help prevent them in the future. And really, we're doing that with the embedded intelligence and automation that I think Yemi mentioned. Over the years, based on work with our customers, we've gathered over 250 potential conditions, events, and failure points where we have automatically built those alerts into the system, and you will get notified anytime one of those thresholds are hit. And so you have to do very little to be alerted before users are ever impacted. And again, this intelligence has been built based on the expertise, not only the team has, but what we've heard and learned from over the years with our customers. We've included those deep and broad metrics, as I think, George, you mentioned earlier, where we can gather information across servers, hypervisor layers, operating systems, licensing services, Active Directory, all the virtualized apps and desktops, all in that single console, along with end user behavior elements, along with EHR apps if you're in healthcare. And then really finally, it's driving those and fostering collaborative conversations with historical reports across other IT teams, your management staff, other vendors. We've all sat in these meetings where it's a bunch of finger pointing based on assumptions and hunches. It's take the assumptions out, put in empirical evidence, and you're going to drive final results and conclusions, leveraging a lot of the reports, Yemi, you just showed. So with that, and kind of talking about reports, one of the first questions that came in was, is it possible to kind of check SLAs that have been met or haven't been met, both in terms of logins and other general analysis? And the same individual kind of followed up with, does this tool allow to show trending over time? So Yemi, any thoughts around that you could share?
Absolutely. So when it comes to understanding performance metrics in your environment, KPIs and things like that, that's how customers are leveraging our tool on a daily basis, not just the reporting capabilities, the monthly reporting, but on-demand reports into log-on times, as we mentioned, as well as any other metric that we collect, so whether it's latency or things like that. Specifically, I think when we're talking about, details into slow logons or logons or just availability, there's another portion of the technology that we didn't really go through, but I think now would be a good time to actually talk about, which would be the application availability monitor. And this is the portion of the technology that serves as an early warning system to sort of issues taking place. And what's really interesting about this portion of the technology is that here it is on the screen. It allows you to log on and test the delivery infrastructure from different locations. What this does is it allows you to identify any sort of regional or site-specific issues taking place in the environment, but it also gives you an early warning system with details so you can see exactly what would present to users if they come up with these issues. So at the top of the screen here, you have a live dashboard of all of the launches taking place before users are actually logging into the environment. So this gives you, as well as management, an understanding of availability, and that's what you get with this yellow trend line here, availability at any point in time for all of those launches that you're taking, all those synthetic logons or launches that you're taking in your environment. And then the blue bars here represent average launch time for all of those launches. Keep in mind that in the event of a failure, in this case, you will get an alert, but in the event of a logon taking longer than usual, you would also get an alert. And then you can come here to the bottom of the screen and analyze each one of these alerts, each one of these launches. So you can see what date and time, what launch was taking place, whether the launch was successful or if it failed. And if it did fail, you can see exactly where it failed. And you can click here and see details into each stage of that logon process, down to what error message would have presented to the user in the case of the failure. So this gives you an early warning system to be able to get ahead of slow or inconsistent or poor logons. And then it also gives you the ability to solve those issues, as well as a sort of a dashboard or KPI document showing you overall availability and logon times in the environment. Hopefully that was I know that was a detailed answer, but hopefully that answered the question.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, the only other piece of that question was, is the data exportable? So when you talk about the data, I know the answer is yes, but do you want to share any additional information on that?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, there's a ton of different areas within the technology that you can export to PDF, you can export to Excel, and as well as the monthly reports that can be sent out, or weekly, or however frequently you would like those reports to be sent out as well.
Perfect. And maybe this is one, George, you could take a first shot at as being our Citrix expert, and then Yemi, you can add some detail. But a question came in while you were showing the application monitoring tool, Yemi. How does this compare to the Citrix application delivery management ADM service? I don't know, George, if you wanted to take a first shot at this, or Yemi, but I'll turn it to George first.
Yeah, well, ADM is a monitoring and management tool that is more specific to the load balancers. I'm gonna say NetScaler, but it's now been renamed to Citrix ADC. So ADM will monitor those products. I think maybe what the attendee meant to say was potentially Citrix App Probing, and what is the difference between App Probing and the Application Availability Monitor. And with that, I would say that one, the application probing from Citrix Director is still sort of in the early days. There's not a whole lot of customization you can do in terms of schedules and so on. Whereas if you look at Goliath's application availability monitor, there's literally a lot of different settings you can configure to tweak the probing essentially how you want it. And also one of the big things I like about the application availability monitor as well is that it provides screenshots. So that to me is like hard evidence. And I really like that aspect of the product. Yemi, you'd probably be able to add a bit onto that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you hit that spot on. What we hear from customers is the screenshot capability, the ability to schedule these launches. This also works for published applications as well as published desktops. So a lot of people publishing VDIs can use this, the application availability monitor, to launch those sessions. The application availability monitor also is able to handle things like single sign-on and two-factor authentication, as well as it's able to sort of click through any sort of security or licensing statements that pop up during the logon process for the users. But yeah, apart from those, that you hit that spot on, George.
And then Yemi, a follow-up to that is, what's required on the Citrix server to collect this, and is there an agent? Yemi.
So For the application availability monitor, there is no technology that's required to be deployed on the Citrix infrastructure. It's just you just need a full Windows OS that has access to Citrix, and you can do those launches. You can do those launches across the environment. But for sort of the detailed metrics and how we talked about those different scenarios, how customers are able to troubleshoot. We collect data in a number of ways. Number one, yes, there is a lightweight intelligent agent that is deployed on your Citrix delivery infrastructure, as well as the session hosts in your environment. So whether those are XenApp or Zen or virtual desktop environment, but it's a lightweight intelligent agent. It's about 1.5 meg in size. Takes up 0.1% of a CPU core. Doesn't require a reboot on installation. So it's really, really lightweight, but it really gives us the ability to pull back those deep metrics and even trigger some remediation actions based on the alerting and so on and so forth. The other way that we collect it would be through agentless integrations into Citrix, as well as the hypervisor platform if you need to. So that's how we collect data.
Perfect. And then one last question, although there's 3 parts to it, from someone here is there automated actions, meaning can based on an event, you run an action? Follow up to that, I'll just go through them, Yemi, then, is how much history is available with the reporting? And finally, just a confirmation of, did you say 20% of the core is using the agent? So maybe go to the 20% of the core of the agent, then go back up to automation.
Yeah, so it was not 20%. It's 0.1% of a CPU core. So yeah, hopefully it's definitely not 20%. Now the automation question. Yes, absolutely. So the remediation actions can be triggered on the event. So we have some that are sort of standard, which let's say there's an error with a specific service on, let's say, your printer spooler service, for instance, right? If there's an error, we can actually automate or restart that service on that error. So that's one thing that you could do, and it's really simple. It's just by clicking on a checkbox, and it restarts that service for you. But if you wanted to do some sort of more complex remediation actions, you can actually have that alert trigger a PowerShell script or a batch file or an application that would, let's say in a printer spooler service example, it will kill the service, it will clear the printer cache, it could also email users on that specific server saying that they need to resend those print jobs and then restart the service. So you can sort of extend the product in a little bit, leveraging those the automated remediation capabilities of the technology. And Stacey, what was the last question?
It was asking how much history is available for reporting. Right.
So as I mentioned before, so we don't average or roll up any information that we collect. So we give you the ability to keep all of that information. And we sort of give you the ability to keep the information however long you would like. So we have customers keeping information for 60 days, 90 days, 180 days. In healthcare, a lot of our customers keep the data for about a year. So, all of the data is available to you as long as you would like to keep it. And you can leverage those in reporting, or also just go back within the product and pull up and take a look at information as well. So we give you the ability to choose how long you can keep the information for.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank Yemi and George. Really, thank you for taking your time out of the day to participate in this webinar. I want to thank everyone also that is on the attendee list here and has stayed with us. And so if you would like to see a free trial, please go ahead and email into techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com. And I just did get one last question. Someone was asking, they are a control-up customer. Can you sell to them anyways? Oh, absolutely. We can do that, and we'd be happy. We have some programs in place for swapping licenses of potentially competitive situations. So I will have someone follow up with you individually, but if there's others on the phone, we're happy to have that conversation with you as well. Again, thank you, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day.